Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today we are going underground to explore the hidden world beneath our favorite wines.
Literally going underground. I like that. We're getting our hands dirty today. Yeah,
Putting on our boots and grabbing our shovels because we're diving into the world of Vineyard Soils.
sounds good.
And I think this is going to be a particularly fascinating one because we have two sources that are really going to give us a great dual perspective on this.
Yeah.
We have Solos dos Vinhedos do Mundo,
Mm.
which translates to Soils of the World's Vineyards.
Great overview there.
Yeah, a great overview, a real global perspective.
Yeah.
But then we also have Alma da Videira, which means the soul of the vine.
Nice.
And this book has a subtitle, The Essential Influence of Soil on the Quality of Grapes and Wine,
Wow.
from a sommelier's perspective.
Oh, interesting.
So we're going to get the science, but also that sensory perspective of someone who is really tasting the influence of the soil.
That's really cool.
So our mission today is to basically uncover this often overlooked element of winemaking. I feel like we talk about grape varieties and climate and the winemaker's techniques, but the soil is sort of like the unsung hero.
It really is the foundation, quite literally.
Yeah, it's the foundation. And we're going to really reveal how profoundly it shapes the character of the wines that we love.
I'm excited to dig in. No pun intended.
No pun intended. So let's start with the basics. I mean, what is soil in the context of viticulture?
Well, I think a lot of people might think, oh, it's just dirt, but it's so much more than that.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
really the life support system for the vine.
Okay,
It provides all the essential nutrients and water that are needed.
makes sense.
It's like a combination nutrient depot and water bank all rolled into one.
I like that. Nutrient depot. Water bank.
Yeah.
What are some of the key nutrients that are found in the soil that the vines are actually pulling up and using?
Sure. So you have the big three that everyone's heard of. You got your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium.
The NPK
You got it.
that you see on fertilizer bags.
Right.
Yeah.
But beyond that, you also have a whole range of micronutrients.
Okay.
And these are needed in smaller quantities, but they're still absolutely essential. Things like iron, manganese, zinc, copper, boron, molybdenum, a whole bunch of them.
A lot of elements on that periodic table are in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And these are all going to impact the health of the vine and ultimately the quality of the grapes.
Now, you mentioned the water bank aspect, and I think that's really interesting, especially when you think about some of the world's most famous wine regions that don't actually get a lot of rainfall.
Yeah, absolutely.
How does the soil manage that?
So the soil's ability to retain water and then slowly release it to the vine is absolutely crucial,
Okay.
especially in those drier climates. It acts as the buffer against drought stress.
Right.
And then that prevents those big fluctuations in water availability, which can really negatively impact the grapes.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that the water availability actually directly influences the levels of things like acidity, sugar, and those all-important phenolic compounds.
The phenolic compounds. Now, those are the ones that are responsible for color and tannin and those more complex flavors in wine.
Exactly. They play a huge role in the character of the wine.
So it sounds like already, right from the beginning, the soil is really setting the stage for everything that's going to happen above ground.
Absolutely. The foundation influences the entire structure.
Yeah.
And we're not even done going down yet.
Oh, okay.
We got to talk about the physical structure of the soil.
Okay.
So its texture, how porous it is, and the drainage.
Okay.
All of that really affects how the roots of the vine develop.
I can imagine trying to grow in soil that's really hard and compacted.
Yeah.
That'd be a tough.
It would be.
Go for the roots.
It'd be like trying to run through concrete.
Yeah.
So ideally, you want a soil with lots of air pockets and little pathways for those roots to really penetrate deeply.
To explore.
Exactly. So you want a nice, well-structured soil. And that's going to allow the roots to access water and nutrients over a much larger volume, which just makes for a stronger, healthier vine.
So if you think about it, it's like a house, right?
Yeah.
If you have a really shallow foundation on your house, it's not going to be as stable as one with a deep foundation.
Exactly. That's a perfect analogy.
That's used with the vine.
Yeah. A deep root system is crucial for the overall health, vigor, and productivity of the vine.
Right. So we've talked about how soil affects the vine itself.
Yeah.
But how does that actually translate into the quality of the grapes and ultimately the wine we're tasting?
Right. So it's interesting because the actual minerals in the soil, they don't actually get directly absorbed into the wine.
Okay.
There's this whole idea of minerality, but it's not like you're tasting little bits of rock in your wine.
Right.
But the soil does have this huge indirect influence on the quality of the grapes.
Okay.
And that's where it gets really fascinating. So it affects things like the vigor of the vine, how the grapes ripen, the concentration of sugars and acids, that phenolic development we talked about, even the vine's resistance to diseases and pests. All of that is tied back to the soil.
So it's not so much like a direct transfer from the ground into the glass.
Yeah.
It's more like this subtle, interconnected web of influences.
It is, yeah. It's this beautiful interplay between the soil characteristics, like the
Oh.
texture, the structure, the drainage, water retention. And then on top of that, you've got the climate, you've got the grape variety, and then, of course, you have human influence, the way the vineyard is managed.
Right.
So it's all these things coming together to shape the unique personality of the grapes.
And that's what gives us that regional distinction, that terroir.
Exactly. The soil is a foundational piece of that terroir puzzle.
Okay. I think that's a good segue into getting a little bit more specific about soil and talking about some of these fundamental concepts. Let's start at the very beginning. How does soil actually form?
So this is something that most people don't really think about.
I know, I don't.
But it's a really slow and fascinating process.
Okay.
And there are 5 main factors that are involved.
5.
Yeah. So first you have the parent material.
Yeah.
And this is the underlying rock type. So whether it's granite, limestone, volcanic rock, that's going to have a big influence on the mineral composition of the soil.
That makes sense.
And then you have the climate. So weathering from rain, wind, temperature fluctuations, that all gradually breaks down that parent material.
Okay.
Then you have topography.
Okay.
And this plays a role because if you have a steep slope, you're going to have more drainage and erosion.
Oh, okay.
But if it's flatter, then more material can accumulate.
Okay.
Then you have all the organisms, so tiny little bacteria and fungi and earthworms and things like that.
Yeah.
All these guys are helping to decompose the organic matter and aerate the soil. And then finally, the most important factor is time.
Time.
It takes centuries, millennia, even for a mature, well-developed soil profile to emerge.
Really?
Yeah. We're talking geologic timescales here.
So next time I look at a vineyard, I'm going to be thinking about the millennia
Yeah. It's pretty mind-blowing.
that went into creating that soil.
It really is.
Okay, so we've got this very slow process. The soil forms. What's actually in it? What are the main components of soil?
So there are 4 key ingredients. First, you have the minerals. And those are the tiny little bits of rock that came from that parent material.
Right.
And those are providing the nutrients.
Okay.
Then you have organic matter,
Oh, okay.
which is all that decomposed plant and animal stuff.
Right. Dead leaves and...
Yeah, dead stuff. But it's really important. It's like, imagine trying to bake a cake without any flour.
Good.
The organic matter is like the flour in our soil cake. It gives it structure and it helps it hold on to water and all those good nutrients.
All right. Makes sense.
Then, of course, you have water. That's essential for life.
Yes.
And it's the transportation system for nutrients in the soil.
Okay.
And finally, you have air,
Really?
air pockets within the soil. And those are really important for root respiration and for all the little microbes that are living in the soil.
Okay. So we've got our basic recipe for soil.
Mhm.
And you mentioned earlier texture and that it's important. You threw out these terms, sand, silt, and clay,
Right.
which sound a lot like my kids' craft supplies.
They are.
But what do those actually mean in the context of soil?
So those are the 3 main mineral particle sizes.
Okay.
Sand is the largest.
Okay.
And that means that it creates larger spaces between the particles.
Okay.
So that means good drainage,
Okay.
but maybe not so good at holding on to water and nutrients. It's kind of like a sieve.
Right. It just flows through.
Yeah. Then you have clay, which is the smallest.
Okay.
Those particles are tiny,
Okay.
so they pack together really tightly.
Okay.
And that means they're really good at holding on to water and nutrients,
Okay.
but they can have drainage issues
Okay.
because the spaces are so small.
Right.
And then silt is somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
In terms of size and characteristics.
So it's like Goldilocks and the 3 bears.
It is.
You want the one that's just right.
Right. And the specific mix of those 3 particles is going to have a big impact on the style of wine. For example, if you have a lot of sand, you might get a lighter-bodied wine with more delicate aromas.
Okay. I've heard of that, yeah.
Yeah. And then if you have more clay, you might get wines that are more full-bodied and have more tannins.
Makes sense. Like you were saying, it can't hold as much water, the sand.
Exactly. It's all about how much water and nutrients are available to the vine.
Now, you also mentioned that soil structure is important, and that's not just the same thing as the texture.
It's not. So texture is all about the size of the particles.
Okay.
But structure is about how those particles are arranged.
Okay.
So are they clumped together? Are they loose and crumbly?
Okay.
And that's going to affect the drainage and aeration of the soil.
Okay.
So a well-structured soil is going to have lots of different sized pores,
Okay.
which allows for water to drain, but also for air to circulate.
Makes sense.
And organic matter plays a key role here. It acts like glue, helping to bind those particles together and create stable aggregates.
Like the flour in the cake.
Exactly. It gives the soil that nice crumbly texture that's so good for the roots.
Now, you mentioned pH earlier, and that's something I remember from gardening. Is pH important for grapevines too?
It's huge. It's all about the acidity and alkalinity of the soil.
Okay.
And most grapevines like a slightly acidic to neutral pH,
Okay.
somewhere between 5.5 and 7.0.
Okay.
And this is because in that range, the nutrients are most available to the vine.
Right.
If it's too acidic or too alkaline, then the nutrients can get locked up and the vine can't access them.
That makes sense.
So pH is a really important factor in vineyard management.
So we've got this whole symphony of elements going on beneath the surface.
We do?
Now let's bring it to the glass.
All right.
I'm sure this is what everyone's been waiting for.
Yeah.
How does all of this affect how the wine actually tastes?
This is where it gets really exciting and a little bit mysterious too.
Okay.
So the soil influences the grapes in ways that we can actually perceive in the finished wine.
Okay.
So things like aromas, flavors, tannins, acidity,
Well,
but all of those can be affected by the soil.
one thing I always hear about is minerality
Yeah.
in wine.
Right.
And I think this is where people get the idea that you're tasting the soil.
Yeah.
But you said that's not really the case.
It's not a direct transfer.
So what's going on there?
So minerality is this really interesting concept.
Okay.
And it's often associated with wines grown in soils that are rich in calcium carbonate.
Okay.
So things like limestone or chalk.
Right.
And people describe it as this kind of like stony or flinty aroma.
Right.
Or even a salty saline-like flavor.
Okay.
But it's not like you're actually tasting the minerals themselves. It's more about how the soil affects the expression of the grape variety.
Okay.
So some people think it has to do with the way those minerals interact with water and create certain compounds in the grapes.
Okay.
And then volcanic soils are also often associated with minerality.
Interesting.
And those have a different mineral composition.
Right.
So they might impart slightly different nuances to the wine.
Okay. So it's not a simple one-to-one relationship.
No, it's complex.
And then what about other aromas and flavors? Can those be affected by the soil too?
Absolutely.
I'll
So
leave that.
for example, soils that have a lot of clay or organic matter,
Okay.
those can sometimes contribute to earthy flavors in the wine, like
Yeah.
a forest floor kind of aroma.
Okay.
And that's something you might find in wines like Syrah.
Right.
And that's partly due to the soil.
Okay.
So the soil can really play a role in shaping the overall aromatic profile of the wine.
Interesting. And what about tannins and acidity?
Right. So those are really important structural components in wine.
Yeah.
And the soil can definitely influence them.
Okay.
So well-drained soils,
Okay.
those tend to lead to more balanced vine growth.
Okay.
And that can result in grapes with smoother, more integrated tannins.
Interesting.
And then calcareous soils, those limestone-rich soils, they're often associated with wines that have really bright, vibrant acidity.
Right.
And that's because calcium in the soil can help regulate the pH in the grapes.
Okay.
So again, it's all connected.
So it really is this whole constellation of factors that all stem from the ground.
It is. And that brings us back to terroir.
Terroir.
Yeah. It's that magical combination of soil, climate, topography, the grape variety, and human intervention.
Yeah.
It's everything coming together in a specific place to create wines with a unique sense of identity.
And the soil is, as we've been saying, one of those core elements.
Absolutely. It's the foundation upon which the entire story is built.
Okay, so let's take all of this knowledge that we've gained and let's go on a little virtual tour of some of the world's most famous wine regions.
Let's do it. I'm ready to travel.
And let's see how their soils actually translate into the wines they're known for.
Okay.
Let's start in the Old World, in France, the heartland of fine wine.
Perfect.
And I think it's a perfect place to start because it has such diverse geology
It really
and
does.
such a long history of viticulture.
Yeah.
So let's start with Bordeaux.
Bordeaux, the king of wine.
Right. Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot.
Yeah.
What's happening underground there?
So Bordeaux is a really interesting case study.
Okay.
because even within Bordeaux, you have such different soil types,
Okay.
and those differences are reflected in the wines.
Okay.
So if you go to the left bank, places like the Medoc,
Okay.
those are known for those really age-worthy Cabernet Sauvignon wines.
Right.
And the soils there are predominantly gravel.
Gravel.
Yeah, so it's these small stones and pebbles.
Okay.
And those soils are actually quite poor in nutrients,
Okay.
but they drain really well.
Okay.
And that forces the vines to send their roots deep down.
To search.
Yeah. They're searching for water and nutrients.
Makes sense.
And that stress actually helps to produce those really concentrated, structured wines that are built to age.
Okay.
Then if you go over to the right bank, to places like Saint-Emilion and Pomerol, that's Merlot country.
Right.
And the soils there tend to have more clay and limestone, so they hold on to more water and nutrients.
Okay.
And that's why you get those softer, more approachable, and fruit-forward Merlots.
So it's fascinating to think that within the same region,
Yeah.
you can have such distinct terroirs just based on the soil.
Absolutely. And you can even find areas in Bordeaux with sandy soils.
Oh, wow.
And those tend to produce lighter wines that are meant to be drunk younger.
Interesting.
So even within Bordeaux, there's a lot of diversity.
Let's move up north to Burgundy now.
Burgundy, land of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay.
Yeah. Home to some of the most expensive wines in the world.
That's right. And it's all about those tiny little vineyard parcels.
Right. Those climates.
The climates.
And how they have those very specific soil compositions.
Yeah.
What are some of the main soil types you find there?
So Burgundy is known for its limestone, its marl, and its clay soils.
Okay.
And the specific mix of those is going to vary from one climate to the next.
Right.
And that's why you get those really nuanced differences in the wines. So you might have two Pinot Noirs from vineyards that are right next to each other.
Right.
But they're going to taste different because of the soil.
So it's not just marketing hype.
It's not. It's real.
Yeah.
The soil really does make a difference.
Okay. Now, what about Champagne, the land of bubbles?
Champagne. So Champagne is famous for its chalk soils.
Chalk.
Yeah. So chalk is a type of limestone.
Okay.
And it's very porous.
Okay.
So it drains really well.
Okay.
But it also holds on to just enough moisture.
Okay.
And that's perfect for growing champagne grapes.
Okay.
So Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier,
Right.
They all thrive in those chalky soils.
Okay.
And the chalk also contributes to that really high acidity that's so characteristic of Champagne.
Gives it that vibrancy and freshness.
Exactly. And it also helps to create those fine, persistent bubbles.
So the chalk is really shaping the whole character of Champagne.
It really is. It's a key ingredient.
Okay. Let's move south now to the Rhone Valley.
The Rhone, land of Syrah and Grenache.
Powerful wines.
Powerful wines, yeah. So the Rhone is divided into two main regions, the north and the south.
Okay.
And the soils are very different in each region.
Okay.
So in the northern Rhone, you have a lot of granite.
Granite.
Yeah. And those soils are really poor and well-drained. And that's why you get those really structured Syrahs with lots of spice and aging potential.
Okay.
And then in the southern Rhone, it's much more diverse.
Okay.
You have some limestone, some clay, and then you have those famous galets roulés.
Galets roulés.
Yeah. Those are those big round stones.
I've seen pictures of those.
Yeah. They look like giant marbles.
Yeah.
And those stones actually absorb heat from the sun.
Oh, interesting.
And they radiate it back out at night.
Yeah.
So they help to moderate the temperature.
Okay.
And they also contribute to the style of the wines.
So the Southern Rhone is known for those Grenache-based blends.
Exactly.
That are really full-bodied and fruity.
Yeah.
And that's partly because of the Galets roulés.
It is. It's all about the soil.
Okay. I think we've done a good overview of France. Let's hop over to Italy now.
Sounds good.
Land of pizza and pasta.
And amazing wines.
And amazing wines.
Yeah.
Let's start with Tuscany.
Tuscany, home of Sangiovese.
Yeah. Chianti Classico, Brunello di Montalcino.
Right. So Tuscany has a really interesting mix of soils.
Okay.
You have Galestro, which is a clay-rich shale, and Alberice, which is a calcareous sandstone.
Okay. Those are some new ones for me.
Yeah. They're very Tuscan.
Okay.
And the Galestro is thought to contribute to the structure and the tannins of Sangiovese.
Okay.
While the Alberice can add acidity and elegance.
Interesting.
And then you also find some clay, some limestone, and even some schist in different parts of Tuscany.
Oh.
And all of that contributes to the complexity of the wines.
Makes sense. So it's not just about the grape variety.
It's not. It's about the whole package.
Yeah. And the soil is a big part of that package.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's move over to Piedmont now.
Piedmont. Nebbiolo country.
Barolo, Barbaresco, some of those really powerful age-worthy wines.
That's right. So Piedmont is known for its marl soils.
Marl.
Yeah, and marl is this mixture of clay and calcium carbonate.
Okay.
And it tends to be really rich in minerals.
Okay.
And it's thought to be really important for Nebbiolo.
Good.
So it contributes to those firm tannins, the high acidity, and the complex aromas.
Okay.
But you do find other soils in Piedmont as well. Like you have some sandy soils in Roero.
Okay.
And then you have some volcanic soils up in Gattinara.
Interesting.
So there's diversity, even within Piedmont.
Okay. Let's go to Spain now.
All right.
Rioja, Ribera del Duero. Two of my favorite Spanish wine regions.
Great choices.
Yeah. What's happening below the surface there?
So in Rioja, it's all about the clay and the limestone.
Okay.
And that combination is really good for Tempranillo,
Okay.
which is the main grape in Rioja.
Right.
So the clay helps to retain water,
Okay.
and the limestone provides drainage.
Yeah.
And that creates this nice balance for the vines. Okay. And then in Ribera del Duero, it's more about limestone and sand.
Okay.
And that tends to produce Tempranillo wines that are a bit more intense,
Okay.
and they have really deep color.
Interesting.
So again, the soil is playing a key role in shaping the style of the wines.
Okay. Last stop on our whirlwind tour of the Old World is Portugal.
Portugal. Let's go.
Douro Valley, home of port.
Yes, and those incredible dry red wines, too.
Yeah.
So the Douro is all about schist.
Schist.
Yeah, it's this really hard, flaky rock,
Okay.
and it's very poor in nutrients,
Okay.
and it doesn't retain water very well.
Okay.
So it's a tough place for vines to grow.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But that struggle actually results in those really concentrated, intense grapes.
Makes sense.
And it's thought that the schist also contributes to that mineral character in the wines.
Okay.
And then if you go down to the Alentejo region,
Okay.
you get a much wider variety of soils.
Okay.
You have granite, schist, limestone, clay, sand. You name it, they've got it.
So they probably have a wider range of wines too.
They do. They make everything from crisp white wines to rich, full-bodied reds.
Okay. So that was our Old World tour.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's jump across the Atlantic
All right, let's go to the New World.
to the New World, and let's start with the USA
USA, land of opportunity.
for wine as well.
Yes, and they have a huge range of soils
Right,
because
yeah.
it's such a vast country.
Yeah.
So you have everything from volcanic soils to alluvial soils to clay soils,
Okay.
and each of those contributes to the character of the wines.
Okay. Let's give a few specific examples.
Okay.
Like Napa Valley.
Napa. So Napa has a lot of volcanic soils.
Okay.
And those tend to give the wines minerality and structure.
Okay.
And then they also have alluvial soils, which are those soils that have been deposited by rivers.
Okay.
And those tend to produce wines that are more fruit forward and have more body.
Okay.
And then you also have some clay soils in Napa, which can give you more concentration in the reds.
Okay.
So even within Napa, you have a lot of diversity.
Yeah. And then Sonoma County.
Sonoma, yeah. So Sonoma has clay, sand, and gravel.
Okay.
And those different soil types contribute to the wide range of wines that are produced there.
Okay. And then we have Oregon and Washington State, both known for their Pinot Noirs.
Right.
What kind of soils are they working with?
So Oregon has a mix of volcanic, basaltic, and sedimentary soils.
Okay.
And Washington has volcanic soils, which is wind-blown silt, and alluvial soils.
Okay.
So again, lots of diversity.
Right.
And then even in New York State, which is not the first place it comes to mind when you think of wine. No.
They actually have some really interesting soils.
They do. They have glacial soils, clay deposits, and shale bedrock.
Okay.
So there's potential for great winemaking there too.
Okay. Let's go further south now to Chile
Chile, land of the Andes.
and some really exciting wines.
That's right. So Chile has a long, narrow geography.
All right.
And that means it has a really diverse range of climates and soils.
Makes sense.
So in the Maipo Valley, they have alluvial and volcanic soils.
Okay.
And that's where a lot of their Cabernet Sauvignon is grown.
Okay.
And then in Colchagua Valley, you have clay and granite soils.
Okay.
And those contribute to the character of their wines.
Okay.
And then you have other regions like Casablanca, Leda, and Biobío,
Right.
all with their own unique soil profile.
Okay. Let's go over to Argentina now.
Argentina.
Malbec country.
Yeah. So Mendoza is the heartland of Malbec.
It is.
What's happening with the soil there?
So Mendoza has a lot of alluvial soils.
Yep.
And those soils are really stony.
Oh.
And they're actually quite poor in organic matter.
Okay.
And that's thought to contribute to that really intense, concentrated flavor of Argentine Malbec.
Okay.
And it also helps to soften the tannins.
Interesting.
But of course, Argentina has other wine regions as well, like
Yeah.
Salta in the north and Patagonia in the south,
Right.
and each of those has its own unique terroir.
Okay. Our last stop on our New World adventure is Australia. Australia, Shiraz Central.
Yeah. So the Barossa Valley is famous for its Shiraz. What kind of soils do they have there?
So the Barossa has a mix of schist and sand,
Okay.
and the schist tends to produce those really rich, full-bodied Shiraz wines, and then the sand gives you lighter, more elegant styles.
Interesting.
And then if you go down to Coonawarra,
Let's go.